You're in the hands of an adolescent.
It's mystery. I don't like mysteries. Your bellyache. I gotta kill you right now.
Aye, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core podcast. I am UrzaMaster. With me, as always, Lord Uther. And joining us today, our recurring host, who's just a host, I guess, Dan Gallagher of Fatal Attraction. Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome back to engineering. Today, we move into two of the more famous and perhaps infamous episodes of Star Trek, the original series, that is Mirror Mirror, and of course, why am I drawing a blank at the other title of the episode?
Doomsday.
Changeling. Oh boy. You know, it's one of those days where we all need to fill up our Spock heads and enjoy some very strong coffee.
Indeed.
I was doing that for the sound effect. Bad idea.
Well, you achieved a sound effect, all right. There you go.
Our listeners are going, whew, this just keeps getting worse and worse.
Can't wait.
Well, thank you, everybody. We are on that road to 1,000 subscribers here at Pending Rebrand. Warp Core Podcast, a big driver of that. Thank you to all of our followers. If you're not, as 98% of you are not, head below, click that subscribe button down by the description. And bear in mind, here in the year 2024, very famous year in Star Trek history, we are headed towards hopefully merchandising out Pending Rebrand and the Warp Core Podcast. So you may one day have a mug with Spock's face, a mug with Kirk's face, and next to it, Dan Gallagher's face. Hopefully. That mug could hold perhaps 12 ounces of coffee or more. You definitely want to drink out of that mug. Anyhow, I turn it over to Dan Gallagher now to walk us through some behind the scenes and some unique trivia for these episodes that maybe even you hardcore Trekkies out there like us may not have heard before. So, Mr. Gallagher, take it away.
Thank you, UrzaMaster. Thank you, Lord Uther. Happy New Year to all of our Warp Core fanatics and diehard Trekkies. And let me just say as a personal note, never get into an elevator with a book editor in New York City after a night of heavy carousing and your wife's out of town with the kids. It never ends well. All right, we are going to have two episodes today directed by our returning champion, Mark Daniels. He did both The Changeling and Mirror Mirror, this latter of which we will discuss in due time. But we will start with the episode that aired on September 29th, 1967, episode 3 of the second season. Again, Mr. Daniels was our director, and our writer is a new writer to the show, John Meredith Lucas, and he ended up writing 4 episodes throughout his tenure of Trek in seasons 2 and 3, and ended up directing 3 of them. So he will become a trusted collaborator in the episodes still to come. His non-Trek credits, again, they run the gamut during these years of all the familiar shows. 3 that I think stand out with a science fiction bent for Mr. Lucas. He wrote episodes of The $6 Million Man, the short-lived Planet of the Apes television series, and the shorter-lived Logan's Run adaptation television series. So he did have a sweet tooth for sci-fi, including his brushes with Star Trek. Returning champion Mark Daniels, who you'll remember, along with Joseph Pevney, directed the most episodes throughout the series run. I believe they ended up tied at 14 apiece. You can actually see what he looks like. He appears in The Changeling in a still photograph generated by the Enterprise computer as Dr. Jackson Roykirk, the original inventor of Nomad, and whose play on the last name gives us the reason that Nomad believes Kirk is the creator. So go back and watch, all you eagle-eyed fans, for that brief shot of Dr. Jackson Roykirk, and you will see celebrated episodic television director Mark Daniels. And, bet you didn't know this, this is only one of 5 episodes in the entire 3 seasons of Star Trek, the original series, that takes place entirely upon the Enterprise. There are no excursions to planets, there are no cutaways to alien battle cruisers or anything of the sort. Strictly within the 4 walls of NCC 1701. We've already seen Charlie X, which is another episode in the first season that pulled off the same neat trick. This is the first one of the second season, and there are a couple of others whom I will not name now just to surprise you down the road. But only one of 5 that never ventures out of the Enterprise corridors, bridges, sick bays, engineering, and other alcoves, nooks, and crannies. So, and if anyone who's ever seen the episode, and we hope it by now, as you're enjoying the Warp Core, you've actually had time to watch it or rewatch it, or maybe you'll turn it on as soon as we're finished and discover its joys for yourself. It is an obvious precursor to 1979 Star Trek The Motion Picture, which we will dive into here in some detail in just a few moments. In fact, one could say that it's very Star Trek The Motion Picture, and it's almost astounding that the 79 version didn't lay more credit to or an homage to John Meredith Lucas's script here, because they're just, the influences are undeniable, unmistakable, and it very much provided a blueprint for what they were trying to do to relaunch the franchise on the big screen. And let me start by saying this shouldn't come as some surprise. I mean, we, the gathered Warp Core hosts, as well as you viewers, more often than not, are big Star Trek fans. But I was amazed how strong this episode was. I was not prepared for, not that I was surprised that a Star Trek episode could arrest my senses and grab me by the lapels from the get-go. But this was a really, really, great episode. And I'm probably spoiling how many Warp Cores I might award it to later in the show. Except for 2 really goofy, decisions. And by goofy, I just meant that they were so sort of outside the lane that I think it bears our opening salvo of discussion here. Like the opening salvo of photon torpedoes that the Enterprise unleashes in the teaser. We kill Scotty, and we wipe Uhura's memory as part of the ongoing episode there. Now, all I'll say for Scotty is, so far this season, in Who Mourns for Adonis, and now here, and then spoiler alert, perhaps in an episode we're going to be discussing in just a few short minutes, it seems James Doohan's contract for season 2 basically involved him being flung from one end of the set to the other. The more acrobatic, the better. And in this case, it literally is the death of him. And I want to talk about that because from a writer and a viewer's perspective, whenever you kill a main character, when we killed Bones for a period of time in Shore Leave, or we've killed, Kirk in Amok Time, even though it was all just a clever ruse. I think that you don't want to go to that well too often, and especially if you're going to keep bringing him back to life. And this is something that maybe modern Trek with Tasha Yar and other cast fatalities over the seasons and over the shows and so forth may have done a slightly better job with, is that death should still mean something. It shouldn't just be used as an arbitrary plot point or just a convenience, a deus ex machina. Oh. And I think what struck me at first, and we'll get your guys' opinion here shortly, is that, yeah, we killed Scotty, which should have been a jaw-dropping, fall-off-your-couch moment in 1967. But then we resurrected him within the commercial break, or just shortly thereafter. So there's no real impact. I mean, they might as well have just frozen him in space, in time, in a moment where Scotty's frozen and he can't move. It has the same effect. So I don't know what future Trek episodes in the original series will grant us, but I'd kind of like him to veer slightly away from let's kill an attractive supporting character that the audience is invested in, only to resurrect him within moments and then, oh, look, nothing happened, he's okay. So, but we'll talk about that. And then the Uhura, the memory wipe. And I'm not even going to sound off on that because that's where some of this I want you guys to take to there. And again, it works out. It's not as if it was there, but maybe that's part of the problem is that it works out. If you're going to do something so radical to a character, something that's like, whoa, I could not have predicted that or seen that coming. And then to basically undercut it / erase it by episode's end, presumably. Like, what does that do to us as the viewer or so forth, or your connection to the character or things like that? So let's talk about the killing and resurrection of Scotty, which took less time than it did to resurrect our Lord and Savior. And Uhura, who is basically when we last left her studying for her college boards.
I mean, you know, I did also love this episode, and those are two questionable decisions that they still work, and that's the thing that almost frustrates me a little bit is, you know, I think the way they set up Nomad as being this sort of all-powerful machine was like surprisingly well done.
Yes.
So I think the killing of Scotty kind of makes sense. Excuse me. The Uhura portion of it, though, as much as I kind of felt weird about it, it also works because it demonstrates another layer of power just beyond, you know, simply killing somebody that seems pretty impactful. And that to me was almost scarier than like the prowess of the machine, you know, just to kill, like just to kill unwittingly. That's something that I think V'ger, you know, the motion picture, I guess, villain, if you want to call it, you know, they kind of balanced it out. It wasn't so much that it could, you know, amalgamate things and virtually wipe them out, but it was just this unfeeling, sort of imposing entity that Nomad was kind of approaching, but Nomad almost was a little too human. You know, there was a little too much emotion behind it. It was confused. It was sometimes angry, sometimes, you know, obedient to a fault that almost made it seem oddly innocent. Now, the way Nichelle Nichols sort of acted out the I have to relearn how to read and speak was a little goofy, a little cheesy, but I mean, it worked. It really got it across, and Majel Barrett did an amazing job in this episode, sort of showing this sort of empathetic nurse chapel kind of, I don't know, it's something that seems to be missing in the original series. You get it a bit more from Dr. Crusher in Next Generation and other people in future Star Treks. But it was good. I mean, it was something that didn't weaken the episode, although it very well could have. I also think this is where it leads to the trope of, you know, killing a main character only to bring him back all the time, which, you know, Family Guy and other sort of satirical comedies have made fun of very well. I mean, the Nomad itself has a whole South Park episode dedicated to it, which tickles me to no end because I think it's a fantastic character to sort of lampoon, right? I don't know. I mean, it kind of dances on that edge of almost being a little too cheesy, but certainly at the time, I think it was still impactful. Again, I think we have to remember, you know, we weren't binge watching stuff at the time. You know, this might have been a week or a couple weeks in between, depending on the TV schedule. So it probably didn't have as much of a, you know, too often dipping into the well of killing a main character effect that maybe we would get now if you're watching the series, you know, as a subscriber of the Warp Core podcast. Might do to binge watch along with us, you know, and be like, wow, they sure do kill these characters and bring them back pretty frequently. Well, when you've waited an entire week and you've talked an episode to death within the first 2 days, and there's plenty of other good TV to distract you, it's probably still relatively novel. Now, I think that probably goes for younger watchers. I think the older folks who are watching the show, maybe with their kids or with their grandkids, were probably thinking, didn't they just kill somebody last week? Why do they have to kill somebody all the time? You know, I think there's a little perspective there too. But that's probably why some older folks didn't like the show back in the day, is because they kind of, you know, they hit those tropes and they're like, wow, that's a little cheesy. Like, I want to go back and watch, you know, the $1,000 Pyramid or whatever game show at the time. But I still liked it. I think even still from a modern viewpoint, it's still effective. It borders on being ineffective, but it's not quite there.
Oh, no.
I think the killing of characters really like that and then bringing them back is pretty standard, probably all the way up until Game of Thrones, right? I mean, that's when, unless you want to talk about Colonel Blake and MASH, but he died off screen, right? And that was it. That was pretty impactful. But the idea that, or you're a red shirt, which we'll get to that in a couple future episodes, that I had mistakenly watched not mistakenly, but I watched ahead the past couple days. But, you know, the killing of the character and bringing him back, again, just kind of seems that's how it was all the way up until Game of Thrones. And that was a great thing about Game of Thrones for a while, was you never knew who's going to be next. You knew that a character could die. And then you get emotionally invested in those characters and they might be leaving.
I think the problem with that, though, is they went overboard with it. They just killed everybody.
Well, that's what I felt about Walking Dead, too.
Yeah.
Like, they jumped the shark on that and overplayed it. So and we've talked about this before on a whole bunch of different things. There's just that fine line that you have to walk to keep interest and for it not to become tropey. Like, we use the term trope a lot, but it's very accurate. The Uhura thing was cracking me up because it was just, she's sitting in sick bay, just, you know, watch Spot run or whatever it was. I don't know. Like, they didn't have something a little bit better for that time period that they could have re-educated her, but maybe that's why that piece I struggled with just a little bit. I could see wiping her memory, but the re-education part that threw me off a tinge. The one thing I really liked in this episode was they were using this whole point of view with Nomad. Like, Nomad would be moving along and you were getting that point of view, which seemed kind of different.
Yes.
For that
like
episode.
A dolly shot.
Series. Go ahead there, Dan.
Like a dolly shot of Nomad,
okay,
yes. No, we have not seen that, I don't believe, that kind of camera work up to now. That was That was very
And it almost made me wonder if they kind of did that out of necessity because they didn't want to show the strings or the wires. I mean, I don't know. But that was something I thought that was kind of cool from this episode. That was a little bit different. And I also like the idea that it was this smaller machine that was literally just raining death everywhere. You know, where you're expecting maybe a massive cloud like we see in the motion picture. So, and I also agree with that point. I feel like they kind of missed out tying that back, you know, like in the motion picture, tying it back to this episode, because I think it would have, and I really like the motion picture, but I think as I got older, I liked it. When I was younger, I didn't like it as much, but, you know, I thought the motion picture, in a sense, was intuitive and using the idea of one of our probes actually coming back to haunt us in a sense. So all that to me just played out well. I wish they would have linked back to it, like you said.
Well, and this was my second sort of follow-up to this notion of Nomad versus V'ger. I mean, we see that Nomad off camera has killed like 4 billion souls in this parsec, in this sector, the Enterprise. It's just wiped out this entire quadrant. And then on screen, it disintegrates, kills 4 red shirts in just this episode alone. Two-man security teams get zapped away. It kills Scotty until they convince him to repair Scotty. And then it wipes Uhura's memory. So it's a formidable foe in this episode. They're dealing with high stakes. So then I ask you guys, when we had Ilea, the Delta navigator taken over by, you know, V'ger and so forth, and acting as the mouthpiece, as Nomad was able to communicate with the crew directly, it took Ilea and her sacrifice and absorption to become, you know, Ilea 2, and then basically speaking for V'ger. Should V'ger have been even more dangerous? I'm just wondering. Like, I feel like if you're going to do the tale of the tape for the two, that Nomad clearly out punches it as far as like abilities. I mean, I know it took out a Klingon patrol, and I know it took out a Federation listening post and so forth, and it was threatening Earth. But I mean, I don't know. I kind of feel like in this point, V'ger is a distant second as far as what we see. Nomad really, untethered could have, wiped out the galaxy. Your thoughts?
Well, and I think the interesting thing about Nomad being different from V'ger is that's a truly accidental, thing that happened. Those two collided. Whereas V'ger, similar type deal merged with, some other technologies and eventually became, what we see in the motion picture. But V'ger was kind of more accidentally dangerous, seeking its creator and accidentally becoming, dangerous due to its, sort of prime directive that it had to absorb all knowledge and report back. It's virtually identical story to Nomad, but Nomad, kind of got that sort of mix-up that made it. So it makes sense that Nomad on the surface was quite a bit more dangerous, but if you think about the ways that V'ger accidentally becomes dangerous, because V'ger's story is essentially the same story of the Enterprise. The exploration bit, go out and discover and gain knowledge. It's accidentally very dangerous to do that. You have things like the Prime Directive that arise out of it because, you might totally screw up a whole society. You might screw up a whole quadrant. Accidentally involve yourself in a giant war like we see on DS9. V'ger, again, I think this gets back to something we talked about in the motion picture, our first Warp Core episode, was possibly responsible for the Borg. Because of its foray out into deep space, the idea is, V'ger was seeking to gain all knowledge, came into contact with, a Borg-like primitive species, and inspired them to completely redo themselves and make themselves better and more perfect by absorbing all knowledge. If you think of it that way, V'ger's infinitely more dangerous than Nomad, because if you cause the Borg, which become possibly the number one villain in all of franchise history here, that's pretty impactful. Whereas I think Nomad would view the Borg as an infection, and that would be something that I think Nomad is so indiscriminate in its destructive capabilities that it wouldn't be something that would go to the level and degree that V'ger would. Because V'ger could simply absorb weapons. It was just gathering that information. Nomad probably could have been destroyed by a disruptor or, some kind of, gamma quadrant weapon it had never run into before. So I do still think that V'ger's probably the stronger of the two, although I think V'ger's intent is less. I wouldn't even call Nomad necessarily evil, but like the amoral force of the two, I got to give credence to V'ger. I think V'ger ends up being more forceful in its amoral gathering of data, whereas I think Nomad's amoral cleansing is a little bit less, I don't know, imposing. I guess I hope that makes sense.
Interesting.
I just, if someone would just make this all one arc at one point and bring all these together, I think it would make a lot of sense, because we talked about that before too at some point, that V'ger was probably or should have been a part of the Borg story, right? Because it's never established. But man, it would make a whole bunch of sense, because it's really, it's like they're just different iterations of each other over time, where if I think we link them together, and that's obviously what we're kind of doing here, it really makes a lot of sense, and to me makes, even though in my opinion those are strong stories, it makes it even stronger, which really I should use different words than that, but you know what I'm saying.
I guess what I liked the most about this episode that surprised me compared to the motion picture, which I was well versed with, was that right from the get-go, we have a push-pull antagonist opposing force that the crew can, rationalize with, argue with, try to convince otherwise. And their final solution to, getting Nomad to short circuit and violate its own programming and so forth, it's much cleaner than, Decker rewiring the probe and somehow being like, it's much more of a mystical, spiritual solution in the motion picture, whereas this one, Kirk, torturously taking it through its logic centers. Like, as I'm watching this and I'm watching them try to, reason with it, try to, convince it not to do what it's set out to do, try to get it to override its own programming in the end, I think of the motion picture, and we spend an awful long time before Ilea becomes the mouthpiece, the spokesperson for the Cloud. And even then, I don't think we consider Ilea to be a true antagonist or villain. She punches a hole through a wall, when she's impatient. But she's not really a villain by any means. She's not the Borg Queen from First Contact. And so I just liked how this episode took a central conceit of the motion picture and just made it more grounded, more one-on-one, more direct than just trying like, what does this cloud mean, Spock? Maybe you should attempt to mind meld with it. Like, it's, I don't know. It was I think a cleaner, and obviously it was made for television in 1967, so they had to, work around whatever they had to work around there. They didn't have unlimited budgets and Douglas Trumbull and doing special effects. But I just felt that this solved some issues that I may have had as a young person with the motion picture very eloquently. And like I said, I ended up the episode saying, man, that was a really strong episode. Why did they wipe Uhura's memory? But, nevertheless, we can be thankful that she did recover.
I know we're talking a lot of motion picture here, but too bad. But that's what V'ger wanted, though. V'ger was looking to take the next step. So the merging, in a sense, with the creator was the next step, right? I mean, that's right. It wanted that. It wanted the emotion. It wanted all those pieces. Where Nomad seemed maybe more militaristic. Well, again, to Urza's point, right? Like the cleansing and all that kind of stuff. So to me, it's a little more militaristic, which, by the way, why there's not a statue of James T. Kirk every mile or two on planet Earth at some point? Because this guy can out-talk the smartest of robots and gods. So I can see why he should be studied by everyone throughout Federation history. Because we think Spock's a genius. Kirk is like the ultimate, well, maybe Kirk's just the ultimate psychologist. I don't know. But he can out-talk anybody.
And he claims he's not a diplomat, which is like shocking to me. That, like, I'm no diplomat. So, anyways, right. That's how that there. So again, aside from these things that could have, as UrzaMaster suggested, could have fallen off the tightrope, they never do. We never need the safety nets below, because they bring it through. And it was, for me anyways, when I think of classic Trek, and again, a lot of these I'm seeing for the first time, I don't know if the Changeling was in my subconscious or conscious as like, oh, that's one of them. But this is absolutely a slam-bang episode. And when we're talking about at the end of the season, which ones do you recommend to people to watch, or what was your favorites? This, for most of this running time, this one's got a pretty good. It's going to have some stiff competition, though, for the episode that followed it a week later, on October 6th, 1967, Mira Mira. And as mentioned at the top of this show, shame on you if you've fast-forwarded ahead to see how this one ends. Mark Daniels, our returning champion, is the director again. And we have another new writer, Jerome Bixby. And every time I hear the name Bixby, of course, I think of the 1977-78 Incredible Hulk show. And if you haven't seen that yet, with Lou Ferrigno, it's spectacular. But Bixby, Jerome, was actually a short story author and screenwriter. His episode of The Twilight Zone, or let me backtrack, his short story, It's a Good Life, which was written in 1953, was the basis of both a 1961 episode of The Twilight Zone, a famous episode, and one installment of The Twilight Zone, the movie, which had the unfortunate John Landis helicopter crash that killed extras and actor Vic Morrow in 1983. That was not this segment. But anyways, It's a Good Life was so popular, it was in the original series and in the updated movie in the 80s. Bixby himself wrote 4 to 5 episodes of the original series. And he also co-wrote the story for Fantastic Voyage, the 1966 film. I believe Donald Pleasance and Raquel Welch were amongst the cast, which then became the basis for Inner Space with Dennis Quaid and Martin Short in 1987.
I can't wait to see the Cinebit on that one.
Indeed. The Cold War shrinkage of scientists to save a scientist who has a blood aneurysm, and they shrink a crew down to microscopic level to go into his body and eliminate the aneurysm before it kills him, because he has secrets that the Russians don't want to get in the hands of Americans. It's a fantastic story for a fantastic voyage. Jerome Bixby did co-wrote the story. And I bet you don't know this, Trek fans, Isaac Asimov, who was ended up writing and working on Fantastic Voyage, he proclaimed Jerome Bixby an excellent piano player. Who knew? Now, as for the mirror universe itself, first glimpsed in this episode, it has been revisited in 5 Star Trek Deep Space Nine episodes over the course of its running. And if you want to flash ahead to DS9 and find those episodes, they were Crossover, Through the Looking Glass, Shattered Mirror, Resurrection, and The Emperor's New Cloak. So you'll find the DS9 version of the Mirror universe. I remember Kira Nerys being particularly naughty in that
wonderful,
in that,
shall we say,
installment. And they also, it was basically the backbone of the first season of Star Trek Discovery. And I don't want to spoil any of that. We have not yet ventured into those quadrants. But basically, the Mirror Universe and its denizens, including Michelle Yeoh, Academy Award winner recently for Everything Everywhere All at Once, plays a big role in the first season of Discovery. So this truly is, as UrzaMaster would say, a foundational episode for the franchise. And it's appeared in novelizations, it's appeared in comic books, it's the Mirror Universe and the science behind it and so forth. This was a big deal back in 1967 and in present day. Look at how Marvel has created an entire multiverse of alternate realities, alternate heroes. I just recently enjoyed over the holidays the 2nd season of the animated What If, which is a terrific show on Disney Plus if you like different variations of your favorite Marvel heroes and villains. And so this one, I mean, I really want to let you guys steer what made the most impression on you, either on a watch or a rewatch. I will say it starts weird. Like, I don't know why, but the whole staging on the planet's surface with the purple haze sky and so forth before we get into the meat of the episode, it just felt like, it was like we were back to Who Mourns for Adonis. It just felt very stagey. And I know we're dealing with sound stages in the Desilu era in 1967, so I won't, they don't need to go out and shoot on location at Vasquez Rocks again. But it just, that's the first image we have of the show, I believe. I don't even know if we have an Enterprise shot establishing, but if we do, it's the first shot of anybody in the frame. And it just, right away I took the note, odd opening staging. Like, it just didn't quite feel like, it just was like, all right, find your marks, Kirk, and you, and alien civilization, okay, that's fine. But then we quickly get off planet side, and boy, do the seatbelts come off there. We've got Sulu getting handsy, we can talk about. We've got Evil Chekhov, who is, again, a new cast addition, and here we are in the 4th episode, and we're giving him some additional screen time and bonus with that curly mop of hair. we've got the "I'm a doctor, not an engineer." That's a good line from Leonard Bones McCoy. We have the revelation that Kirk killed Christopher Pike to be promoted in the Mirror Universe, and all of us Chris Pike fans, I'm sure, blanched when we heard the name drop there. Back then they only had the cage to fall back on, but we've got 2 seasons of Star Trek Strange New Worlds under our belt, which we've also done on the Warp Core, which is a terrific reason to subscribe and catch up on our analysis of totally modern Star Trek. We have Agony Booths. We have Barbara Luna as Marlena and Kirk. And again, to date myself and sound hopelessly out of date, I mean, she provided a little va-va-voom in the late 60s there. Like she was she definitely had her own unique niche with Mirror Kirk and later Good Kirk, Kirk Prime. Kirk and Uhura in the Mirror Universe, they go sleeveless. Like, it was a good fashion sartorial choice. Like, neither of them, it was a gun show, and, sun's out, guns out, and they had those there. Scotty is flung again. So this is what I was referencing to earlier. It seems like every episode we're going to throw Doohan as far as we can lift him. We got Sulu back with a blade, which was nice ever since the Naked Time in season 1. And I believe this is the first time, there he is. I believe this is the first time that Scotty, I've ever heard him say Jim. It's always Captain, it's Sir. It was always a formal rank, but at some point near the episode, Jim. And I thought that was a nice touch because it just took me aback saying, I don't think I've ever heard Scotty say that. Not even in Generations when they were retired and on the Enterprise B that Alan Ruck damn near ran off the rails on its inaugural voyage, which you'll find in our discussion of Star Trek Generations, also on the Warp Core podcast. So anyways, gentlemen, take us away. There's so much good to which harvest and bear fruit. What did you guys think of Mirror Mirror?
It really justified the fashion trend of the goatee. I mean, I love this episode. I mean, it's top to bottom fantastic. I love the animalistic, animated, struggling Kirk. Let go of me. What do you want, Spock? What is it you want? Power? I can get you power. Money? Women? Like all these things just add up. The unique part about this, and I think this is the coolest thing, and you see a little bit of it in the DS9 versions, but the similarities between the Spocks. And of course you get this with the similarities between the O'Briens in DS9, which we'll get to eventually, is that, even in an alternate universe, there are still so many close parallels that, it's rooted in science, right? So, all possibilities, all, things could be equal out there, or one small detail may be different. You switch from a peaceful exploration-based society to a warlike culture, and it's amazing, all the differences you see. But I think the biggest takeaway I had from this is just how well acted everything is. You get these very much diametric opposite characters, and yet these actors can still pull it off in full, candor and color. It's just so incredible. And Chekhov, at this point, feels like he's been on the cast since the start of the series. That's I think one of the most successful characterizations. I mean, this show does many, many things well, but Chekhov really feels like he's always been there. And he could have easily been a 1 or 2 or 3 off character at this point. I mean, like a Nurse Chapel, in some, not in some kind of motif. And yet he feels right at home. And that's something that I think this evil Chekhov kind of lends itself to, is that you're like, no, Chekhov, no, don't do that. And the intrigue and the behind the scenes infighting and Sulu having this, weird sort of main event type character in this episode. You don't see a lot of that in the original series, and even in the movies. Sulu's important, but even when he's a captain, he's still sort of a supporting tertiary character, and it almost like it ingratiates him a bit. You feel almost like closer to Sulu because he's sort of just there in a lot of episodes, but he's also like a fundamental player. And it's really now in season 2 here in these first couple of episodes, the core cast that we know and love from the subsequent films like have all sort of gelled and become this, I don't know, inseparable unit that like this is why they bring back characters when they kill them off. Like, you can't not have them. They have to be there. And then Uhura being able to, I think this might be my favorite thing from a modern lens looking back. Being able to take ownership of her womanhood and use that as a weapon is so cool to see. And it's not like overt, it's not overly graphic, it's more empowering than it is anything. And that's something that I don't think 1960s television really did otherwise. Not until maybe like Mary Tyler Moore did you see, a woman really owning her womanhood and being able to use that in a way that wasn't like Archie Bunker's wife. You know what I mean? So that for me was probably like, I think, because you could say so many, like there's so many good things happening in this episode, but there's very few things that probably stand the actual test of time. Because from a modern lens, you're like, oh, this is just, toxic masculinity at its finest and blah, blah, blah. I really think that this is probably one of the most progressive things that happens on the show, to this point anyway. And it's so well done, and it's so subtle, it's not overstated, it doesn't beat you over the head with the message, but it just demonstrates that, like, even in this sort of cutthroat society, you have a woman of color doing something to elevate herself amongst sort of the boys' club. You also get that from Marlena too. So not to discredit or discount her, she's very, cunning, conniving, self-aware, able to leverage her own power in a way that's kind of inspiring. And that's where I think you get the Kira Nerys of the future mirror universe we see, and this really sows some fantastic seeds that I don't know. It crafts this large alternate universe of possibilities for Star Trek that I'm a little bummed they didn't go into it in further detail in Next Gen or Voyager or some of these other latent Star Treks that would have been, just outstanding. There's so much you could do with that. Maybe a Star Trek Legacy episode someday. One can only hope.
Would it have been strong enough to hold a feature? Because now I feel like maybe that's someplace we might have missed in either the original cast or the Next Gen films. Would that have been enough of a crutch to hang a story on? Would you have gone and being excited to see a mirror movie, like basically like on with a bigger scale? And
absolutely, and I think they kind of did that in Picard, sending everybody back to back in time, but or the militaristic universe where Picard was this like conquering general with all these skulls, Gul Dukat's skull hanging out in his library. And I think that just goes to show that you could very easily have made this into a feature scope. I think any of the Star Trek casts could have sold it. Even Discovery, which, I'm going to be frank, I haven't watched Enterprise, but the stuff I've seen, about 5 minutes of Discovery I watched, I was like, someday I'll go through and watch it when we get there on the Warp Core, because we're going to have to. But I have to say I was not inspired by the first few minutes of Discovery. But yeah, I think you could do a big blown up. Although I will say, with what DS9 did, you'd be challenged now to breach new territory. But I have the utmost faith in the Star Trek writers, especially now with Strange New Worlds and Picard. I do think they missed the boat. Could there have been a Star Trek 7 with the original series cast, you know, aging, having to see their aging selves in the mirror universe. You know, what was Mirror Spock up to all those years later? You know, how did this all pan out? Would have been very, very interesting, even if it was just part of like a brief brush in a feature film. It would have been interesting to see.
Yes. Anyway,
Spit take. Yeah.
so I'm gonna be in Dan's position when we watch DS9, because I really haven't watched that series as much, but I do remember them, or there was some mention of there being mirror type episodes. To me, this is just brilliant. You know, again, to UrzaMaster's point, where William Shatner is being dragged down the hallway, the way he's moving his arms and just giving us that great Shatner overacting. What are you doing? I mean, it's so Shatner. It just makes you love the character all that much more. And you know, I like how Spock in the mirror universe still has like this moral compass that he kind of goes by. You know, he's still using logic, and kind of combined with that moral compass of you know, what he could possibly try to achieve, or maybe possibly turn around. And it's funny, because to me, I think the most powerful part of the entire thing was Uhura. And I think it spoke volumes that a woman stood up to a man and said no during that time period. You know, almost like, you know, bait and switched him a little bit, and then said no and said, you know, you better watch it. And even, I think she even pulled a knife on him at one point too, or stole his knife. So I think that had a lot more to say to the audience, in a sense, than maybe the episode itself. But that's what Star Trek is. It speaks about those types of things and brings almost like a kind of an awareness to it, that a woman could stand up and say no, and with something like that. So it was something else that I was kind of just that really stuck out to me. You know, but as always, this crew just shows how well they work together. They just show how well they play off of one another. Yeah, and the Chekhov part, how he fits in seamlessly, seems very Strange New World-ish in a sense, in terms of how that crew just meshed right off the bat. So just great Trek all around. Again, like when we talk about what's an episode you might show to someone, like this is an episode that could get someone hooked.
Do you? I don't think there's any disagreement how strong we feel about this episode, but I almost wanted to spend an equal amount of time, or even if we had roles had reversed, I would have liked to have seen the mirror Trekkies on board normal Enterprise NC. I mean, we get the cutaways, so we know what's going on, because it's basically the inverse of what we're seeing there. But do you think it was better to show the human Enterprise crew trapped in a Savage mirror universe, or the Savage Enterprise crew members struggling to get along with the rational Spock and McCoy and things of that nature? Like, which one, as a viewer, do you think would get across the same point or be more fun? Do we want to see a Savage Shatner the whole episode screaming, "I'll give you loot and treasure, and I'll make you the king of this parsec"? Or do we want to see the rational Kirk trying to come through to Marlena and Spot? Like, I'm curious what in your personal tastes, would the other way have been just as compelling to you, if it had been Savage in the normal universe versus normal in the Savage universe?
Oh, that almost seemed like, to me, that was the only letdown of the episode, is that, you know, whatever happened on our Enterprise, Spock figured it out right away. Like, something wasn't right off the bat. He figured it out, and they threw him in the brig right away. Where if we know Kirk is this cunning type of leader who figures things out, like he did when he beamed aboard the Mirror Universe Enterprise, why wouldn't he have possibly done that, you know, on our Enterprise? Why would he have not maybe tried to have figured out or worked his way around it, right? So to me, that was the only part of the episode that I was kind of like, yeah. But I get why they couldn't do it, unless they would have done a two-parter. I think nowadays that could have almost been like some kind of a two-part or three-part arc that we might have seen, or that they could have possibly shown. But they do kind of seem to shy away from that, don't they? Where the evil side, or like the evil ones in our universe, we don't tend to see that, right? In all the other episodes, we've just seen the other side of it. I don't know if that's what happened in DS9, but that's my guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think the truth of the matter is, at the time, people who were producing content for television wanted to show the good guys doing heroic things, because there was a lot of scary stuff going on in the world. I mean, it's kind of like, I think about some of the stuff that came out shortly after, 9/11. You got a lot of like feel good, very, kind of yay America stuff, and it just was there to sort of service, a mourning nation. And at the time, of course, you have the Vietnam War, you have the Cold War, you have all these tensions in the world. It's okay to show like bad guys or evil, but you wouldn't want to showcase it. You kind of want to have that real strong good guys are going to win, feel good. You're not leaning so hard into the wholesomeness like Leave It to Beaver, but you're definitely presenting like complexity in a way that's still digestible. Whereas today, I think you can definitely play with more complexity. Like, by and large, the good guys still prevail almost universally, but it's a lot less shying away from, well, let's look at it from the villain's perspective. It's this sort of postmodern viewpoint. I don't know that I feel badly that we didn't get more of that, because I think the beauty of Spock in both situations is that he figures things out pretty quickly. I think what's interesting, perhaps more interesting, is that Spock in the alternate universe realizes it almost right away, but then has to sort of calculate the most strategic way to bring it to bear, right? Whereas Spock in the Prime universe is just like, oh, something's wrong, I know exactly what to do, and I'm going to do it right now because these people could run amok in time. Vice versa, Spock knows something's wrong right away. However, if he takes action, that could lead to chaos. So he has to dial himself back. And that is a more compelling, I think, presentation, because he's got to really, sort of pace out, okay, I need to figure out the exact right time to get this all dialed in so I can resolve it without... Because he doesn't want to be captain. He also doesn't really want anything to change. He's quite comfortable. Chaos would be very bad for him. It'd be very bad for everyone. And he's sort of striking that balance, whereas Spock is just a protector of the peace in the good universe. It'd be a lot more of him just sort of sitting there going, now how can we correct this? And it's probably all up here. And I think it'd be honestly kind of boring. Like, it'd be Spock, sipping Vulcan tea and meditating, So, which, look, I'd be entertained by it. I mean, let's be honest. As a Trekkie, you're entertained by anything Trek. But I think certainly at the time, the action was on the opposite side. And DS9 does a very similar job. Although, I'm not going to spoil anything, they do get a little more artsy about how they cross over and back and forth. So it's for those who've not watched DS9, I believe it's like 167 hours of television, and it is absolutely fantastic. And the Mirror Universe episodes, all 5 of them, are fantasies you should definitely dive into wholeheartedly. And I can't wait to give them Warp Core ratings, because I'm already excited about it. This episode I'm very excited about. And speaking of our Warp Core ratings, I think it's about time we crack into them for these 2 episodes, because we've had a lot to say about them. And certainly, being 2 of the most famous episodes, they have likely been talked to death. But what people don't know is, how does the Warp Core podcast feel about The Changeling and Mirror Mirror? Dan Gallagher, let's start with you. What ratings do you bestow?
I think The Changeling falls just shy of absolute greatness for the reasons explained in the beginning of this episode. I think that's a 6.5. I mean, it is just a hair's breadth from achieving a perfect 7 for me. But boy, like I said, I walked away impressed, and I can only hope that the rest of season 2 and season 3 is as strong. But I know that that's probably a Ferengi folly, and we will see a few more stinkers like Who Mourns for Adonis. But we haven't got there yet, so thank goodness for that. Mirror Mirror is a 7 for presentation, the opening staging aside, and for what it means foundationally for the franchise and the universe at large. And I want to point out to our Warp Core fans and all new subscribers and continuing subscribers, when we do deconstruct and analyze Deep Space Nine on those 167 episodes, I'm no good at math, but that's roughly 83 more hours of the Warp Core that you have to look forward to. If we break it down in that classic 2-episode dyad formula that we've perfected here at Pending Rebrand. So think about that, friends. I mean, you have so much more excitement, adventure, and unpredictability coming from your 3 guest hosts here. This is, something to truly put on your bucket list of, I must stay alive long enough to hear their DS9 seasons 1 through 7 analysis. So yeah, 6.5 and 7 for this engineer for this week's episodes.
Great minds think alike, even though I thought of it first. But I would also, you're welcome. I would also go 6.5 on the first. It's just something. Yeah, there's just a little something that seems off, and I guess I'm also probably looking at it, unfortunately, retrospectively, because I would have liked to have seen everything kind of linked together. Maybe we'll see that in the future. Who knows? And then yeah, Mirror Mirror, it's a 7 out of 7. Start to finish, it just, I think for that time, and kind of what we said too, it was just something that was completely different, or that thought of, the Federation could have been bad, like that could have been a very bad thing. And I'm going to say one more thing, because it just kind of hit me too, because we brought up Marvel and how, and to me that's one of the weaknesses of Marvel right now, is all of that stuff, is all this, different timelines and time travel. At least, well, I don't feel like Star Trek didn't go to the well on it as much as Marvel did, or didn't overplay it the wrong way. It's tough for me to explain, but that's, for me recently, that's been a turnoff for the Marvel movies for me. That's just me. And the Marvel stuff. It's all right, Dan. We can agree to disagree, even though we know that I'm right. But so, again, I love how they did it. So I'll stop there. Go ahead, UrzaMaster of Urzas.
And I'm gonna be the one to break the streak here.
Oh my!
Not unlike Brock Lesnar. And I'm gonna step up and say these are both 7s for me. I actually really enjoyed everything about the Changeling, and watching it again all these years later, it just has not lost any of the greatness or the intrigue or the joy of what I had when I saw it the first time. The setup, even the Uhura thing, which is a little odd, the killing and bringing back of Scotty. To be honest, I was hooked. I mean, it had me. And for a 50-plus-year-old episode of television that, to be frank, I've probably seen a dozen times or more at this point in my life, I gotta give it a 7. I mean, it's just something that, some of these episodes I can sit there and I can eat my Wheaties in the morning and drink my Tang and, sort of half watch, before these shows, like Who Mourns for Adonis. Although I will say I like that episode more than when I saw it the first time, this time around, which is not saying much. But I mean, it was just a glorious episode of Star Trek to me, and I that's all I got to say about that one. Mirror Mirror. I mean, let's be real. There was no way I was not going to give this episode a 7. It's fantastic. It's foundational. It's everything that Star Trek is and ever should be. To to me, there's no weakness to this episode. This is one episode I can point to and say I really, honestly, would not change a thing about it. I like everything, even the setup in the beginning, and I think the reason I like the setup more so than others is it reminds me a lot of what I truly grew up with, which was Next Generation. And a lot of those episodes started out in a weird spot. Like they were just on some random planet, they beamed up, and they went on to the next mission, and it was on the way to the next mission that Q showed up, or something happened. Or my favorites are when Luxana Troy just shows up, and just like, you get those weird boop, 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 boop moments. And I don't know. Maybe it was Mirror Mirror that I loved first, or maybe it was that from Next Gen. So when I see Mirror Mirror, and it just sort of starts in a random spot, and everything happens sort of on the way to the next thing they're going to do, I just love it. And as a Trek fan, to see how much in pop culture that it's inspired over the years, like an episode of South Park, which when I first saw that one with Carlos Mencia and the non sequitur robot joke bot, I was like, all right, this is the creme de la creme of like culturally affecting television. And I point to many episodes and many movies of Star Trek as like, without this, a lot of pop culture wouldn't be there. So I got to give it historical credence too.
I'm gonna throw one more thing out there because I'm not smart enough like you guys are, as creative enough. I know what kind of threw me off with the Changeling. I don't feel like the title of the episode lined up with what happened in the episode. So with that, what would you retitle that episode? What would the title of that episode be? I'm gonna take a second because I can talk and fill time for all of our wonderful pending rebrand fans out there who are clicking subscribe right now because they like the in-depth type of questions that I bring up, such as this. So to me, that was one of the drawbacks of the episode. To me, the title does not fit. With that, what would one of you, or what would both of you, what would you title that episode instead?
I defer to the writer amongst us, Mr. Gallagher.
Well, I mean, if you're going to throw out the obvious, you could have just named it Nomad, and so forth, which is not a word I believe that was being tossed around the vernacular with such frequency in late September 67.
Sure.
That might have been like, what's a Nomad? I mean, you could have done, the 50 science fiction route, robot apocalypse, and then convince people how to spell apocalypse. I mean, I like the Changeling. When I first heard that, I had two immediate cinema references: a great underrated George C. Scott 1980 horror movie called The Changeling, as well as a Clint Eastwood, Angelina Jolie, like, my kid was kidnapped and then returned to me, but it's not my kid picture. A little bit of a head scratcher in the Eastwood portfolio there. But that also had that title. So the title conjured up to me sort of like horrific or suspense, terror. So I think I had a different reading on it. I agree with you that there's nothing in it that would suggest the content that is to follow. But for me, it just kind of reinforced this general notion of something is not right. Or, in the George C. Scott picture, it was a haunted house with a child ghost, and in the other one, this is not my child. He looks like him, he sounds like him. That's not my kid. So I just took it in a horror, and I was good with it. But again, you could have done a million different things there. Naughty android. Help. My probe is just attacking. I mean, I don't know. There's thoughts.
I like that. I don't mind the title The Changeling, but I probably would have gone with Synthesis instead. In the sense of the combination of two or more things. Because obviously you have two space probes, synthesize them together, and you get Nomad. I think that would be a more of a highbrow approach, which essentially is what they were doing with Changeling. I think they just didn't quite have the vernacular at the time. You could also argue that Changeling was appropriate because Nomad does change not only to its surroundings, not only to the accident it suffers through, but it also changes based on its knowledge of existence around it, right? So it is an entity of constant change. I think that's a little weak, but I think you could argue it kind of makes sense. It's not the best, but Synthesis for me would be the fresh title.
And for you MST3K fans out there, here's your title. 1 + 1 = death. And that could have been the synthesis.
That's it. Done. Right. Perfect.
Slam dunk. Uther,
Okay.
how about you? Do you have an alternate title?
No, no, because
I'd name it Detka because,
I name it
85
Chicago
Bears.
Bears, Jim McMahon, Walter Payton, Super Bowl of
Manos.
'85. I
Hands
still
of
live off that.
The hands of fate.
But yeah, so I don't. And I bring that up because when I think of the Changeling, I think of the Next Gen episode, which we've referenced a lot, which we'll
Yes.
reference when we get to Next Gen. That to me could have been so powerful, and I still hope at some point they try and bring it back. But the episode where the Admiral's in the chair and that bug crawls out of its mouth, which reminds me of a Dale Cooper movie, Kyle MacLachlan movie, that Dan had shown me. What was the name of that one, Dan?
The Hidden, 1987 with Michael
Yes,
Corey.
sir. Yes.
I thought you were going to say
there's so much.
the Changeling, DS9.
What was that?
There's another thing going
See,
there.
that's what we do here at Pending Rebrand. We are out
We're
there. We're
synthesizing all the stuff together.
1 + 1.
subscribe, share it out. Remember, it's a free gift. 1 + 1 = 3. The three of us.
Hey, not 2 + 2 = 5. You don't want that
What
rat
else?
trap over your head.
What
New
else?
math.
Let's
New math.
close this episode out on that.
Well, gentlemen, I think we've done our due diligence here, venturing into strange new ideas for a 50-plus-year-old television series. I am sure Walter Koenig, George Takei, and William Shatner would be proud of the discussion they hear here today when they do watch the Warp Core podcast, because they do watch. They are followers, subscribers of Pending Rebrand. Please, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. And as always, live long and prosper.